Hello and welcome, all you friends, neighbors, family, and citizens of the world. From Chicago, I'm Michael James. I'm here for you with another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. We're recording on Wednesday the 5th. Excuse me, it is Wednesday the 5th, and we're for the week of October 8th. We will air on air and stream on WLUW 887, and then we're on YouTube, podcast, etc. Tell you at the end of the show. Um, Today, we've got two wonderful guests. Some of you miss our sometimes co-host and our co-producer, Katy Hogan. She's going to join us to give us a little bit of an update on what's going on in the electoral work that she's doing and other things that we might all want to pay attention to. And we're also going to start off in a little bit with our friend, Brian Mier, who is down in Brazil where he lives, works as a reporter, and he is covering the election. We had an election on Sunday in Brazil, and Lula and Bolsonaro faced off. Lula got the bigger share of the vote, but not quite enough to bring him over the finish line. So we're going to hear more from Brian about all of that. We'd like to share some good things that happened in our life each week. And for me, I will tell you this week, one of the highlights was taking my activists and activism class at DePaul University up to Uptown in Chicago, where we met with our pal Bob Lawson, and he and I talked to them about Join Community Union. And in case you all don't know, way back from 1965 to close to 1969, Jobs or Income Now, aka Join Community Union, did community organizing in Uptown, rent strikes, march on the police station, food buying co-op, a women's group, a welfare group. Did a lot of groundwork. A number of us went on to do other political work. But there's a group of students that I teach each week who are learning about some of the organizations that help to lay the groundwork for progressive change in Chicago. This week, actually, we'll be talking about the Young Lords. So I'll fill you in on all of that. Okay, take a little tour around the world here. The Russians have annexed 4 regions of the Ukraine. I think you all know that, but there's been a lot of resistance, and the Ukrainians have taken back some of that territory, even driven into Russia. Apparently, the Russian soldier morale is really dangerously low. Soldiers are phoning home, speaking of hopelessness and the desire to go home and surrender. Um, we'll keep you posted of that, and you can certainly find out more about it anytime you want to turn on the news. In memoriam, we were really sorry to hear that Loretta Lynn passed. She was a great country singer, coal miner's daughter, a lot of fame. I always loved her music. I was a little disappointed when I looked her up to see that she wasn't a supporter of the last president. And but she was really good on women's issues and a number of other things. So rest in peace. And close to home for me was a guy named Henry Silva. Some of you remember him in The Manchurian Candidate. I worked with him in 2 Andy Davis movies. One of them was Above the Law, the other was Code of Silence. In Code of Silence, he drives by the Luna household. I'm a bodyguard. I come out. He had thrown a flower out the window. I stomp on the flower and give him a growly look. Rest in peace, Henry. Um, okay. I heard this morning that Katy Hogan, who will be our second guest, had an early morning conversation this week with our newest neighbors, the Venezuelans. And apparently some of them are bunking down over at Leon Fieldhouse for the moment and becoming part of Rogers Park. And when Katy comes on a little bit later, we're going to ask her about that. Okay, please take note. And it's hard to not know about this, but Hurricane Fiona slammed Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has taken a couple of big hits over the last number of years from hurricanes and needs support and help. Right after that happened, Ian hit not only Florida, where we got a lot of news, but also hit Cuba and wiped out all power in Cuba. Power is back now. And I did get an email encouraging me to support Cuba and encourage politicians, particularly President Biden, to end the boycott of Cuba, the embargo, which doesn't let us sell or trade with Cuba. And it also means that a lot of other countries can't. And people are calling for an end to that, at least for a time being, so that Cuba can be rebuilt. That would be the good thing to do, the humanitarian thing to do. On the labor front, don't have a lot of new news, but know that there are worker campaigns for justice and rights, building a union going on everywhere. And workers in Albany, New York, fight to unionize what would be the second Amazon warehouse union in the US. Workers cite safety concerns and poor wages, as well as Amazon's union busting efforts as a catalyst for the union fight. We mentioned Brazil, and we're going to have Brian Mier coming on in a little bit. We'll talk more about that. A lot of you live from the Heartland fans are interested in sports. I've always been critical of a number of progressives who don't pay attention to sports, but a lot of us do. And Aaron Judge just hit his 62nd home run in Texas on Tuesday night. He broke Roger Maris's record. And the guy who got the ball has already been offered $2 million. Close to home, the Cubs and the Sox are totally out of it. Today, Wednesday the 5th, is the last White Sox game. And we got big news this week about women's soccer and sexual harassment. It's been all over the news. Stay tuned to that. Women in the soccer world should be really thankful about this, and hopefully we'll get some real change out of it. A little bit more on sports. The Bulls preseason started Tuesday night against New Orleans, and the Bulls were way down. They came back. They were in the lead, but they lost by, I think, 2 points. But we are looking forward to the basketball season. And a little bit of history, and we'll start with some baseball history. On October 8th, today this will be broadcast on WLUW, I got a phone call. I'm going to take it and say, I'll call you later. I'm recording. I'll talk to you in a minute. Bye-bye. And in 1956, the first perfect game in the Major League Baseball World Series was pitched by Don Larson. And that would have been in Major League Baseball. That was on October 8th, 1956. But also, I discovered that it was also the first postseason no-hitter since Claude Greer did so in 1926 in the Colored World Series. Also on October 8th, the world's first internal pacemaker was implanted. The Great Chicago Fire began in 1971. And also in 1982, Poland's Solidarity Union was banned. And in 2004, Martha Stewart was sentenced to 5 months in prison. On the reefer front, the reefer report, you know how Illinois supposedly passed the most progressive and passed user-friendly marijuana laws. We've been waiting for some action on that. And apparently the first social equity license has been issued. It's been issued to a company that is 60% non-white owned, but it's not from Chicago, where there are a lot of people waiting. It's from Colorado. And lastly, on our banter, Monday night, I went to, via Zoom, ward meeting held by Maria Hadden about the homeless encampment in Toohey Park. We know it's a heavy situation. There was plenty of mixed conversation about it. There were people who definitely understood the plight of the homeless, the situation. There were other people who wanted the police to remove them immediately. People need to know that it's not in the jurisdiction of the Chicago Police Department. It's the Chicago Park District. And I drive by there every day, and I got to say, I see people talking to each other. It's kept up, it's clean. So we have a real homeless crisis in this country. We have one in the ward, and we'll be talking more about that. Maria Hadden will be on real soon to give us an update. Little bit of political news in the ward. The former alderman and the builders group apparently are getting behind a candidate to run against Maria Hadden. That would be I think the president, Belia Rodriguez, who is from the Rogers Park Business Association. Also in the ward, in the 49th Ward, our Great Farmers Market on Glenwood Avenue is still going on. And there are cultural havens with food, music, booze at Jarvis and Greenview and Glenwood and Lunt. And don't forget, on Monday the 10th, Indigenous Peoples Day gathering in Potawatomi Park at 10:30 at 7340 Rogers Avenue. Okay, that's it for the opening banter. Give me a minute and we're going to be right back with our first guest, who will be Brian Mier. So I'm going to pause. Okay, we're back. We're back with more live from the Heartland. And we didn't really take much of a break because I'm a novice at the technical stuff. So we're running this Zoom straight through. And I'm really happy to bring on a friend, someone who's been living down in Brazil for a long time. We once in a while see him when he's up north. The one, the only Brian Mier. And good morning to you, Brian.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Yeah. So where are you located today?
Well, I've been in Brazil 27 years, and after living in Sao Paulo for about 9 years, we just moved to Recife 3 months ago. So it's like
was it a long move? It's a big country. How far was that away from your old digs?
1,500 miles. It's actually closer to West Africa than it is to some places in Brazil. It's the farthest easternmost point of the Americas. It's only like 1,600 miles to the West African coast here. And it's the city where Paulo Freire came from. Paulo Freire, and so it has a long left tradition.
Well, that's good. And you've been down there working as a journalist all this time?
No, I was an English teacher for a while. Then I was an NGO manager for a while at ActionAid. And for the last 10 years in journalism mainly.
Well, that's good. And that's why we got you today, because you're our man in Brazil. And I know you've been real busy. You had an election there last Sunday. I think that was the 2nd. And a lot of us who listen to this show or watch this show certainly were rooting for Lula to win against the semi-fascist Bolsonaro. And I think Lula was projected to get more votes than Bolsonaro, and he did. But tell us what happened.
Well, the media is trying to frame this as if it were a loss for Lula. However, first of all, it's important to say that no challenger has ever beaten an incumbent in a first-round presidential election in Brazil since the return to democracy in 1985. Lula beat Bolsonaro by 6.2 million votes. Bolsonaro did better than expected because the third and fourth place candidates, mainly the third place candidate, just faded out, just disappeared. And it looks like Bolsonaro picked up his votes. The Workers' Party, the PT, it picked up 21 seats in Congress. And in the Senate, which has never had very many leftists in the Senate at all, it increased its representation by 50%, rising from 6 to 9 senators. And in some of the local elections, like São Paulo State, that would be kind of like maybe economically speaking, the California of Brazil. It has 20% of the country's population and 44 million residents in the state. Its state legislature, the Workers' Party increased its presence by 80%. Becoming the second biggest party in state legislature. There are 23 parties represented in Congress in Brazil. So it's a rich multi-party system and everything. So that was a big gain for them. And a lot of really interesting young Black union leaders and social movement leaders have gotten into public office either for the first time or risen, like Paraná State, which is a very conservative state. It's full of Nazis. It was home to the largest Nazi rally to ever take place outside of Germany during World War, during the 30s. It's elected its first Black woman congresswoman, and she's a former teachers union leader, Carol D'Artora. And so it shows that all of these really great young people are moving up within the party, and it's not this kind of identitarianist symbolic tokenism. The party's actually achieved over 50% of its elected officials are now Afro-Brazilian, in tune with the general population of the country. And almost all of them are either former union leaders or former student movement leaders. They're not just like career lawyers or something like that, you know, so there's a lot to be happy about. The problem is that it looks like they kind of sabotaged voter participation a little bit by really slowing down the voting process. So some polling centers had their addresses changed at the last minute in areas and neighborhoods where the left had stronger support. And in some of these, in the Northeast where we're living right now, which has always carried the left, you know, it's always been the biggest support region for the Workers' Party. Some of the lines to vote were like 4 hours long, which is unheard of in Brazil. And so it looks like abstentions rose a little bit. And this always, as any Chicagoan would know, this always favors the incumbent. You know, it always favors the party in power to have low turnout. So it looks like they might have been using, Bolsonaro and his people might have been using that. But, you know, at the end result is that it didn't work that well, because Lula got 10 million votes more than he ever has in his entire history as a politician. He ended up with like 58 million votes.
So what is your prediction on the election, which is held when? The runoff?
It's held the last week of October now, final election. I think, I mean, I'm not a psychic. And as Stephen Fry told me when I interviewed him last month, a week is an eternity in politics, right?
Yeah.
So we've got 3 weeks to go. It looks like right now Lula would win it, you know, probably by about 8 or 9 million votes. That's what it's looking like right now, but anything could happen.
Yeah, you mentioned the US media kind of, or maybe other media too, kind of portraying this as defeat for Lula, but clearly, you know, it's a lot like here in the States where like Biden got, you know, about 7 million more votes than the other guy. And clearly Lula got more votes. What's your sense of the comparison between the United States and Brazil and the kind of move from a progressive leftist government for the last two regimes that were then attacked by the right, and then the current Bolsonaro regime?
Yeah, well, first of all, the left, the Workers' Party in Brazil is much farther left of the Democratic Party, right? Brazil has free universal healthcare. It has free access to public universities, tuition-free public universities. And, you know, the Workers' Party refuses to, it assumes a position of neutrality in all of these big, like, new Cold War-driven international conflicts with the US. It doesn't agree with the US on putting sanctions on anybody. The Workers' Party's president went to Nicolas Maduro's inauguration in Venezuela. It maintains close relationships with the MAS party in Bolivia, you know, and Cuban government and things like that. So it's not, even if you look at someone like Bernie Sanders, the Workers' Party is, you know, you could say that they've implemented what Sanders, some of the things Sanders has promised, but hasn't been able to push through. So at the very, like, the most conservative people within the Workers' Party are probably ideologically aligned with Bernie Sanders. So it's important to note that it's not a case of, like, I think the Democratic Party in the US was weakened, starting with Bill Clinton, when he just took on the Reaganomics, right? Like neoliberal Reaganomics, and then just adapted it. Like there was no pushback against any of the artificial acceleration of sending industrial jobs overseas. That was accelerated by the Reagan administration, the opposite of what the Washington administration tried to do by slowing down factories from leaving the city of Chicago. The Reagan administration encouraged it. The Clinton administration took that mantle and ran with it with NAFTA and everything. And I think that's left a lot of people on the American left, you know, really disanimated, really, like, you know, not that enthusiastic about someone like Joe Biden, even though he's done a few economic things that are an improvement, obviously. But so I don't think the comparison between the two parties is that good. I mean, obviously, international capital would love to see the Brazilian Workers' Party turned into another British Labour Party, Tony Blair style, Clinton style US Democratic Party, but it hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened yet. So I think that, and even the comparison between Trump and Bolsonaro is not that great, because Bolsonaro actually is, he was a former employee of a neo-fascist military dictatorship that tortured and disappeared people, and he's put a bunch of those actors from that era, now military generals, in his cabinet, to the point where like 17 of his cabinet ministers are military generals who were active during the dictatorship. So you could say he's more fascist, or I guess Chomsky would say sub-fascist, than someone like Trump, who Trump uses all the trappings of fascism, but he's never he's never worn a military uniform, like goose-stepped around, like Bolsonaro. Right, so it's a little bit different.
Let me ask you, Brian Mier, down there in Brazil, assuming that Lula wins, and we'll know in a few weeks, but am I understanding correctly that the right wing or the Bolsonaroists did pick up some gains, not only in the House, but in the Senate? And how would you then see Lula governing? Would it be kind of like things held up, like blocked here, or some crossing over, some merging of different political parties to create a majority, etc.?
Well, it's a good question. It was basically, one thing that you have to keep in mind is that Bolsonaro's party that he belonged to 4 years ago, the PSL, the Social Liberal Party, they elected 51 members of Congress, and 52 of them failed to get reelected. So he lost 32 congressmen, and you have some new kind of anti-political clowns coming in saying they're Bolsonaro supporters and things like that, but his core base of support was weakened. He's going to have to rebuild. The other thing to remember is that at the height of Lula's present popularity, when he was polling with approval ratings above 80%, the most control the left ever had over Congress was 26%. That includes the Workers' Party plus its inner core allied parties like the Communist Party and the Socialism and Liberty Party. That together they only made up 26% of Congress. So he did a lot of things by executive order, something that I wish Biden would do, to bypass that impasse in Congress. They rolled out quotas for the working class in the public university system through executive order, which reserved 52% of all public university slots for people who came from families that made less than 2 times the minimum wage, with a special preference for Black students, and radically transformed the whole university system, all through executive orders. And he also made coalitions. A lot of the center right or center kind of moved over to vote with the left on certain measures and things like that, and that definitely pulled the government farther right, but it still managed to pull off a lot of really interesting things. And so in that sense, I don't think there's going to be much change in the challenges faced by Lula governing this time around than there were in 2003 when he first took power, because the capitalist elites have always hated him. The old remnants from the dictatorship have always hated him. And so hopefully it'll be a similar situation, and he's going to sacrifice a lot of goals and focus on eradicating hunger mainly, and restoring the labor rights that were destroyed in 2017. I mean, he's going to have to make some sacrifices, but
Well, we certainly hope he pulls it off, and we're going to probably have you back on then. But how about having lived in South America for a number of years now, what's your general take about the direction of politics in South America? I know in Colombia we have a progressive was elected. We looks like we'll get Lula in again. Various other places. What's your sense of where it's going? Because things seem to kind of flip-flop a little bit. It goes left, right, etc. We like to think it's going to keep moving in a good direction, but doesn't always go that way. What's your take?
Well, the biggest negative influence in Latin America has always been the United States government and the United States corporations. As you certainly know, remember the 80s, the dirty wars in Central America.
Yeah.
The US invaded Haiti like 19 times, and the 64 coup in Brazil was supported by the US, both physically and, in all other senses economically. And Lula's imprisonment had Department of Justice involvement in it, as Hank Johnson, Susan Wild, and a group of other progressive caucus members have uncovered through an inquiry they sent to William Dodd in the Department of Justice. So what's happening now is that the US influence is weakening heavily in Latin America. Like in 2008, the US was the largest trade partner of Brazil. Now in 2022, China traded 3 times more volume with Brazil than the US. As the US influence wanes, the left is coming back in power all over Latin America. So I think it's a good thing. And it's important for all of the countries in Latin America to maintain autonomy and sovereignty against all of the international big players on the international scene, which is why I think it's correct to not get involved in this new Cold War that the US is trying to start between China and, with Russia and all of that. And I think it's a good time. So I think the tide of history is changing in Latin America and the left is coming back. But more importantly, it's a movement towards more sovereignty and less influence from the United States.
Brian Mier, I'm going to ask you one more question. One of the concerns that a lot of people have, and we do get news about it, is Bolsonaro basically attacking the rainforests. The rainforest is crucial to the whole planet. We've seen the results of climate change big time. And I'm just wondering how aware are people in Brazil of the importance of the rainforest and the difference between the two candidates on what will happen with the rainforest. Bolsonaro would, I think, exploit it more, not caring about the future, whereas Lula would be more protective. Tell me where we're at on all that.
Well, first of all, it's always important to remember that the main culprit in Amazon deforestation is the United States. Working through the World Bank in the 1960s, they convinced the US-backed neo-fascist military dictatorship that cutting down all of the trees in the Amazon would be good for national development. And so the World Bank lent hundreds of millions of dollars to unelected dictators in Brazil and in other countries that have Amazon rainforests for these mega road projects that ended up, wiping out dozens of indigenous tribes and destroying huge swaths of the rainforest. And so the reason that Bolsonaro supports this deforestation is because he comes from that military dictatorship. He wants to go back to what Brazil was doing in the 70s when the World Bank, through heavy influence from the US, was financing Brazil to rip down its rainforest to grow beef for corporations like McDonald's and Burger King. Burger King bought all of its beef from the Amazon in the 1980s. At least that's what I remembered when I worked at Greenpeace in Chicago in 88, 89. They were getting all their beef from the Amazon. The biggest single corporate destructor of the Amazon is Cargill Corporation. They started building these huge grain elevators in the middle of the Amazon jungle 20 years ago. These huge grain ports on the Amazon River and on tributaries of the Amazon River. And when Bolsonaro was elected president, they did a $200 million expansion in their grain port on the Rio Madeiros, right on the edge of what they call the Arc of Fire, where they're burning down all of the Amazon. So it has to be Bolsonaro's role in Amazon destruction has to be envisioned as subservient to US corporate interests, right? Now, when Lula was president, Brazil was it was recognized by the United Nations as the country that had most reduced greenhouse gases in the world. He managed to reduce greenhouse gas, and this was mostly because of the vast slowing down of Amazon deforestation. And what Bolsonaro did was he gutted all of the regulatory agencies. He fired all of the people who in the regulatory agencies who are fighting the most to preserve Amazon rainforest. And he gave a bunch of dog whistles to all of the illegal miners who supply gold to Europe and the rest of the world on the international supply chain, and the loggers and all of that, that they wouldn't be punished if they started invading indigenous reservations, because around a fifth of the remaining Amazon rainforest is on indigenous reservations. So those are the places that Bolsonaro has opened up. And I think the US is totally complacent in all of this. Remember, Wall Street Journal supported Bolsonaro for president, and the other big papers spent years repeating false corruption accusations against Lula so that it would weaken the Brazilian left and open the door for someone like Bolsonaro. And we know that this corruption investigation now was a completely fraudulent, and it had heavy involvement from the FBI and Department of Justice. So that the US expanded state is really responsible for this entire situation, including the deforestation of the Amazon. So it doesn't help now, like the New York Times is like wringing its hand and going, oh my God, we're so worried about the Amazon, because they have to look at their role in this whole process.
Well, this has been really good. We've used up our time, but if you have any parting comments that are kind of short, go for it right now, Brian.
Yeah, it was fun working for you as a busboy in 1985 at the Heartland Cafe.
Well, if you have any great memories, Katy Hogan and I are both working together on a book about the Heartland, and we'd love your input.
All right, I'd be happy. I think I ate there the first time in 1978 when I was a kid.
Yeah,
So,
well, you were around. I remember. All right, brother,
all right.
Thanks a lot. And for all you people listening or watching, I'll be right back with our next guest, which will be Katy Hogan. I'm learning how to do this engineering myself, so I'm going to put us on a pause and saying goodbye to Brian Mier. Hasta luego, buena suerte. I don't know how to speak Portuguese.
Boa tarde.
We'll be right back. Oh, okay, we're recording again. It's Michael James here with Live from the Heartland, recording on Wednesday, October 5th for the week of October 8th. And many of you who've been listening to this show or watching it for many years have been reporting to me that you miss Katy Hogan. And Katy Hogan is here with me now. We're really happy to say it's during election seasons, Katy goes off and works to turn out the vote. And she's doing that all the time these last month or so. So hello, Katy Hogan, to you.
I'm a little nervous about my internet. It just froze up a couple times. It's not
Well,
used to
you're working right now, so let's keep rolling.
Okay.
So what are you doing now, Kate? You're
yeah,
turning out
I was
the
thinking
vote.
about it, Michael. If it hadn't been for your generous spirit, I'm talking here. Did you hear me? I was about to compliment you.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I was just looking
so
down.
What is okay. The first time I went to work on a campaign where I had a job was for Harold Washington in 1987. And I basically left the Heartland for about 4 months. And you made an ad for the Reader saying we miss Katy and all this other stuff. And I remember actually weeping because I missed the food so much. And when I would get back from the office, the kitchen was always closed because we worked long hours. Anyway, thank you for supporting my political work all these years, Michael.
Well,
that's what that's about.
that we love you and
okay.
really
Did you hear that?
very grateful to you for keeping a lot of us on track.
Okay.
So what do you got to tell us about the election this year?
Go
First
ahead.
of all, what are you doing? I hear you. Are you there?
You're frozen on me.
Well, keep talking. Even if we're frozen, keep on. What do you got? What are you doing on the election, Kate? Okay.
I don't know what to do, Michael.
Keep talking. Can you hear me?
Now I can, but
Yeah,
you're frozen on my screen for.
Just keep rolling. I'm going to ask the question again. What are you
All right,
doing?
never
now in
mind.
your
I'll
campaign?
tell you what I'm doing right now. What I'm doing right now is the job that Jan Schakowsky, our congresswoman, often puts me to work doing in an election season, which is to help send people to districts, neighboring districts. We did it 4 years ago and helped the successful effort to elect Lauren Underwood and Sean Casten Congress people. We also did it to a fare thee well in 2016, but not a successful one. Any case, this midterm is really significant. And the main thing is to get people aware and fired up to vote. If we don't have turnout, life as you know it will change drastically. And I really cannot stress enough. There are really dangerous people on the ballot from sea to shining sea. And folks need to understand that and be doing their research. And basically all you need to do, fellow citizens, is go vote, go early, and vote straight Democratic. I know I sound like a Richard J. Daley regular, and I know it's appalling even to me, but I'm sorry. It is what's needed this time, in particularly understanding that our ballot, for example, in Illinois, we have a ballot initiative that is at the top of the ballot. It's about workers' rights to collective bargaining. And the question is to whether or not Illinois should further support and ensure that in the Constitution, the state constitution. It'll be very interesting to see how the vote on that turns out, because there hasn't been a lot of talk about it, but it's the first thing on the ballot. Then, of course, everything from governor on down, every single state senator is being reelected, a state rep is being elected because their districts were drawn. Every single federal congressperson is running for reelection, 435 of them, because of the redrawn districts. And so it's not insignificant. It's not something people should snooze by at all. The other thing that's important on our ballot in Illinois and many other states have Supreme Court justices on the ballot. We do not in Chicago have, we're not voting for one this go round, but the two districts just west and a little bit south of us, District 2 and 3, each have a Supreme Court judge on the ballot running for justice, and they're running against some of the people that you really don't want anywhere near your court system. So it's that kind of thing. People have to understand that there are scary people on the ballot, and they should not be allowed anywhere near, the State House, the Capitol, inside or out. So, I mean, for me, I'm not sure exactly why I have this bent, this elections bent, but I feel like I have no choice in the matter, and it's annoying, frankly, because not a lot of other people do, and it's becomes like my job to continually ring this bell. But
yeah, you do have a reputation for being a person who is really deeply involved in elections and helps turn out the vote. It does a lot of getting signatures, gets a lot of people to go to the polls. And, you're a good example for a lot of us.
well, I mean, I'd kind of like, I'd like to pass it on, if you will.
Well, you'll
and
have to sooner or later. I mean, it's like we're looking for younger people to take over, right?
Yeah. And what I'm doing right now, for example, we have 4 weeks left, 4 weekends left before this election. What my job is to find people who will drive to Sean Casten's district this weekend, for example, at Downers Grove, knock doors for both Sean and the Mary Kay O'Brien, the judge running for Supreme Court in that district. The following week, we're going to Joliet for Lauren Underwood, great congresswoman running for reelection. Also, we will be hitting doors for the justice candidate there. After that, the last 2 weekends in October, and this is going to be a heavy lift, and I really need everyone's help. If you can even imagine yourself going out to Rockford to help elect Eric Sorensen in what was Sherry Bustos' district, also redrawn, slightly different, and absolutely brand new candidate. He's also a weatherman, just by the way, but he's running against.
You mean a radical weatherman or a guy who tells us what the rainfall is
He's
going to
a
be?
meteorologist.
Okay, good.
Anyway, he's more than that, and he's a good candidate, and he's running against someone we don't want anywhere near the Congress. Down further south, mid-state, we've got Nikki Budzinski running in a brand new district Of course, gerrymandered. Of course, we know that both parties gerrymander. Of course, it annoys the daylights out of me, but excuse me, no one seems to have the backbone to stop doing it. Anyway, Nikki Budzinski is really a good candidate. She's a young, fresh woman who had some other government experience. I can't pull it up right now. Anyway, she would be a wonderful new voice in Congress for probably the foreseeable future. Both of those people need to be elected and the Supreme Court covered. Now, that's not as sexy as a race. Some of the races, like just north of us in Wisconsin, we've got a Senate race where they have the opportunity to really turn out one of the worst, which is that guy. I'm not going to say his name. Huh?
His name is Johnson, I think.
Yeah, Ron Johnson. Mandela Barnes is running against him, and he's a solid candidate. I think he's doing very well. One of the kinds of work that we as voters and volunteers can do, other than what I just described, which is canvassing, knocking on doors. I know no one can imagine doing that anymore. And I'm not sure if it's ever actually going to go out of style. There's nothing to replace it on social media. Face to face with people in their neighborhood where they see that you're actually putting shoe leather behind your beliefs really can't be topped. I don't know. Anyway, so there's that.
Let me ask you, Kate, when you're out knocking on doors, which you've been doing with a few other people, and you're looking for more, so we need to know how people get a hold of you and all that. Have you run into the opposition out in the field when you've been knocking on doors?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet this
I'm
time.
hoping they're not as active as we are.
Always, well, I mean, in general, when Democrats put people in the field, they're except on some very strong local elections and local initiatives, they're usually the only ones in the field until it gets to presidential election. Anyway, those are always different. But knocking on doors is not, it's something I'm a professional
you
at.
are one of the reasons I got you on, besides I like to talk with you, is you need more volunteers. So if people were willing to either do postcards or go knock on doors, take a ride in a car, go to Central Illinois, what do they do?
I'm going to give them my phone number, Michael.
That's what I like.
Yeah, I'm going to give you my phone number and also my email, and just text me, call me, email me. We need your help, particularly on these weekend canvases. So it's Katy Hogan 70 at gmail.com.
That's Katy with a Y, Katy.
Bingo. HOGAN 70 at gmail.com. No, I am no longer 70. I got that Gmail when I could say to people, they'd go, "Oh, I didn't think you were 70." And I go, "No, I'm not." But that's over. Okay, and my phone number is 773-746-6587. So
one more time.
773-746-6587. Text would be good. Leave me your information. I'll jump on it. One other thing, can I say some other stuff?
No, you can say a lot. And I was going to ask you about how people in other places, not in Illinois, how they might help if you had places that they can contact for doing phone calls or doing emails, etc.
Oh, there is a lot of action on the ground, particularly in the swing states, the states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Iowa, where there's a chance of flipping the Senate. Iowa, not so much, unfortunately. That should be, but anyway.
Grassley's got
Arizona, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Georgia, all of these. So one of the things your wife turned me on to was Brian Derrick. He's got a sign called Oath, OATH.vote or oath.com. Just look up Brian Derrick.
Brian Derrick.
DERRICK. He has extremely well researched and put together lists of the people who currently need your $5 to infuse their state legislator campaign. There's a lot of campaigns nationwide that have to do with counting the vote, protecting the vote. That would be Secretary of State offices, Attorney General offices. In states where it's really neck and neck, blue and red, as they say, those states need to need all the help they can get on the ground, and with donations. Small donations help too, because it scares off the opposition. The opposition is only as strong as we let them be, and the only thing that would really screw it up is if we don't have voter turnout. Voters must turn out. Voters need to start seeing Election Day as their sacrament instead of being so flippin' cynical. It's easy to be cynical about elections and government. It really is. But it's up to us to make it something that is worth not being cynical about. And quite frankly, I think with all his gaffes, Joe Biden has done, knock on wood, an excellent job so far. And I think the Democratic Party is in many ways way more facile, nimble on the ground than it was even 4 years ago. So that's good stuff. One of the things that was developed in the last 10 years of this really on the ground attention to saving ballots is something called curing ballots. And that is when these various legislators led by Republican right-wingers tried to stomp on voters' rights. They did it in a variety of ways, purging voters, moving their precincts in their polling places, limiting how often people can vote, limiting early voting, all manner of stuff. Curing ballots is the process by which volunteers anywhere in the country who have a brain cell working and a computer and a phone can call up voters who have in fact sent for their ballot, but we know because we've got people looking at the lists that are going to be challenged at the ballot box to call them and say, cure your ballot, because if you don't, your vote's not going to count. Now, that's the simplest way to put it, and it should be put in simple terms. It's simply making sure that people who, luckily by virtue of the lists that come out from secretaries of state and boards of election, people will have, organizers will have a look-see and have a good idea and a very specific list of names to call to say, this is what you need to do to make your ballot count. In 2020, the number of people who were doing ballot curing, and it was a big thing for Florida and a couple other states, that number of people that were called to make their ballots cured was exactly the same as the win by Biden in a variety of states. So it's not a small thing. It's a really big thing, and it's something you can do from home. And right now people are doing it from Chicago for Wisconsin. And the other groups besides Brian Derrick's group, which is full of information, there's Indivisible everywhere in the country. They do good work. Move On continues to do good electoral work. There's a slew of groups, and if you don't have the kind of email box that I have, which I bet you don't, you get stuff from the Democratic majority, the PACs, everything. But go straight to the states. The Indivisible group in each state is a good source. The Democratic Party, the Democratic Activist Party in each state is a good source. The Young Dems, if they exist.
Okay, that's good. And your phone number one time, if they want to talk directly with you, is 773-746 6587. Okay,
Yes.
and your email is Katy with a Y, Hogan70@gmail. Is it okay if I shift to the neighborhood?
Sure.
Yeah, I got an email from you or a message or somewhere I learned that you were out and about and you met some of the most recent immigrants from Venezuela who are in Rogers Park, which is our neighborhood on the north side of Chicago, right along the lake. It's the 49th Ward. Who did you run into?
Well, I was on my morning constitutional, which has a regular path around through the little woodland area that was created by volunteers last 2 years ago at Leone Park, just near Sheridan Road in Toohey, and you go around and you come out to the beautiful Lake Michigan and the rocks there in front of Leone. And there were some, I don't know, 20 guys. And I looked to my right, and on the porch going into the field house were another half dozen or so. I had read just the night before that that was being turned into a shelter, a housing for some of the Venezuelan immigrants that were sent to us with love from Texas and Florida. And so I went up to them and, just went up to them right there on the lakefront and stood and we talked for a good 20 minutes or more. And they were so kind, letting me use my terrible Spanish, my broken Spanish.
You're better than me.
But they were eager to talk, and they wanted to know where they could go to learn English. And then one of them said, "I like that jacket." And I said, "Oh God, you guys are going to need more than this jacket soon." But these are all men at Leone, and the women and children that are connected to some of them are staying over in the unoccupied Y, High Ridge Y. And it's an example, pretty precious example actually, of us here in specifically in our neighborhood, but generally in the city, saying, okay, you people, you sarcastic, cynical people sending us busloads, because after all, we are a sanctuary city. Let's prove it. And there's, to a certain extent, it's time for us to. I mean, people who live on the border have a very different experience than we do, and we have to acknowledge that if we're ever going to cross the gap with folks, and Florida being the right on the water there. We have no clue. And not only that, in Chicago, even though we are a city of immigrants, they had to come from both sides first. So, they came from both coasts. By the time they got here, they were maybe a little more equipped to deal with life in America. I'm not sure about that theory, but just geographically, it makes sense. So I think it's a fine thing for us to have to put our money where our mouth is in terms of being a sanctuary city. And I think that if we do it right, it certainly should backfire on the people who meant it to be something more dire and dark, as it were. These people, now there will be problems, because we also have the homeless community in Toohey Park that have been living in tents there for some time. And you will have people going, well, why aren't they in Leone Beach? Well, what I understand is these two shelters for the Venezuelans are temporary until whatever is figured out for them, as hopefully are the tent dwellers in Toohey. I understand you attended the Zoom meeting the other night, and I couldn't get out of my work enough to.
I basically listened in, and I talked about it at the outset of the show, and talked about there were plenty of people who understood homelessness and were quite supportive of working out a good solution. There were plenty of people that were ragging at the alderwoman. She really was very mellow, together, cool, polite, took a lot of stuff in, and did make some commitment to a certain date down the line, having figured out what's to happen. I did point out that Chicago police don't patrol the park, really. It's the park district. So it's not like the commander of the 49th Ward or our police district, which I think is 21.
24.
24, sorry, everybody. Actually deciding to just go move people out. It's not like that. So it was like a long meeting. There were lots and lots of people. And I did point out, when I drive by there, I see it's very mellow. It's neat. It's clean. It's people are talking to each other. It's kind of a nice camp out. But no, I understand it's not, I didn't mean to be light about it.
No, I mean, it's the reason it's contained, and as you put it, mellow, is that from the very get-go, when there were only 4 or 5 tents there, excuse me, people from this neighborhood were conversing with and you know, relating to this growing homeless population. And it's been an incredibly tricky situation for the alderwoman to maneuver, but I think, like you said, she's incredibly patient. She's been, I think, just the right touch so far on how to approach it. But I really credit her for walking a tightrope there. I understand she now has an opponent backed by RPBA, which I'm not sure they're supposed to back some. Oh no, it's just someone who's
She's
on the board
president,
at
the woman, I think her
RPBA
last name is Rodriguez, and she's the president of the Rogers Park Business Alliance.
board.
Well, it's
The president
the
of the
board.
board.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, which probably is not a position she should hold while she's a candidate, but I
Yeah,
don't
well,
know. I don't know if that'll come up.
this all
Any
just came
case-
up today. Well, I think we got enough in the can here, so to speak, Katie. I'm gonna just share with all of our listeners that we are certainly looking for someone who would like to make a little bit of penny scratching money to help to engineer the show, to get it up on YouTube, to get it to the station for airing and streaming. They can contact not only you, but you already have enough, so they could contact me at fatback@aol.com or 773-965-8005. And I want to really thank Emilio Emilio Davis, who's been our engineer, and Imani Warren at Loyola, who's been helping out, and now Josie, the program director, has been very supportive and helpful since our engineer went off to a new job. So I want to thank everybody who makes this show possible. Lynn Orman Weiss, you, Katy Hogan, Tom Clark, and a host of other people. And we always encourage you to do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that we do, that I do, what we do together. All power to the people. And we're going to see you next week. Okay. Over and out. Say goodbye.
Bye.
Okay, and I'm going to stop the recording and hope this all works. Bye-bye.